All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 Military Ethics Case Competition here at the United States Naval Academy. This round, we will hear from the United States Naval Academy as they discuss their solution to this year's case, nipping toxic leadership in the bud. The round will proceed in two halves. First, the team will have 30 minutes to give their presentation on their solution to the topic. And then I will give a warning when 5 minutes and 1 minute remain in this 30-minute presentation time. Judges will then have 2 minutes to confer and enter scores on their scoring sheets, following the criteria on page 1 of the scoring sheets. Next, we will have a 20-minute question and answer period between the judges and the competitors. Teams may huddle after questions, and any number of team members may respond to any given question. I will give 3 and 1 minute warnings on the 20-minute time period in the Q&A session. All judges may ask one question with follow-ups as time permits. At the end of the Q&A, judges will finalize scoring, and all scores will be turned in to me, the moderator, before lunch. Now, without further ado, United States Naval Academy, your 30 minutes will begin once you start speaking.
And may we have visual cues?
Yes, you may.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for being here with us today. The team from the United States Naval Academy would like to present our case for nipping toxic leadership in the bud. As we said in the planetarium, I'm Midshipman Second Class Eddie Ramirez. I'm here with Midshipman Fourth Class Miles McGrail, Midshipman Second Class Olivia Hunt, and Midshipman Fourth Class Ryan Knight. We'd like first to begin by going over the background of the case, some of the stakeholders in the case, and the questions the case poses. Then we'd like to get into the current system that the Naval Academy has. Our approach to this case is a revision of the current Naval Academy system. We'll get into our solutions and the ethical frameworks from which we base our solutions. And then finally, we'll hit some of the counter arguments that might be potentially brought against us and further answer the question of the case before getting to our conclusion. Begin with the background.
So the background is, we wanted to focus on toxic leadership in the Navy. And so this kind of pattern of leadership that is toxic, destructive to the team, as well as driven by the ambition of the leader. And so the general traits that we're looking for specifically are lying, unwillingness to take feedback, so abuse of power and self-interest are just a few. And so this then affects the overall mission of what officers are trying to do, is negatively impacts the ability of the unit to perform, as well as the unit cohesion and potential for positive development. And so we're looking at this specifically through Holly Graf, the case study. And so Holly Graf means a lot to us because she is from the Naval Academy. She graduated in 1985. And we saw that while she was a subordinate and at the academy, she was very successful, did well in the mental, moral, and physical aspects of the academy. And so we first saw those toxic leadership traits while she was an executive officer, so we missed it as a subordinate. And we saw this verbal and physical abuse of the crew, as well as the complaints were lodged, but no action was taken. And so then she assumes the command of a destroyer. And again, we see this mistreatment, we see this verbal, physical abuse, and once again, complaints are seen, but nothing happens. And then we have another command of the guided missile cruiser, and these JOs are seeing this behavior, and finally, we see something happens with these complaints that are lodged, and she's relieved from command. So we want to focus on how can we fix it when she's a subordinate and when she's not in a leadership position. And so we're looking through this through the toxic leadership and dark triad, which we'll talk about further.
So before we get into the case study and to our system, it's really important to focus on the dark triad. While this isn't completely encompassing, this is a standard for the toxic leadership that we're looking for, and we're hoping that our system can investigate. So the three major concepts are Machiavellism, narcissism, and psychopathy. So Machiavellianism, it is a desire for social control. So you see this in leaders that don't necessarily care for their crew or their people, but are more concerned with gaining that authority and that power. For narcissism, it's just an overinflation of somebody's worth, somebody that believes more in themselves than they should. And lastly, for psychopathy, it's somebody that has antisocial behavior that's coupled with a decrease in consideration for passion and empathy.
Of course, these three traits aren't all-encompassing, as Mr. McGrail said, but from them we see the other traits that stem into this toxic leadership. Of course, one might not necessarily be described as Machiavellian, but he or she could be deceitful. One might not necessarily be described as fully narcissistic, but they could be grandiose, or they could exhibit a lack of empathy. One might not fully be a psychopath, but they could be irritable, they could be impulsive, they could be aggressive. And so through these dark triad traits, we see the other traits that stem from this toxic leadership.
So going into the stakeholders of this case, we really want to understand who does poor officership affect. So the primary people that we want to focus on are the American people. We have a duty to our mission, to the Constitution, to serve our sailors well, and to have our Navy be able to perform. And we're unable to do that if we provide officers who have multiple traits within the dark triad. Obviously, the United States government, we are held accountable by the legislative branch, by the Constitution. The Department of Defense and Department of the Navy, as singular officers, we have to report up, and we have a duty to follow through with what we are saying that we are doing. Oftentimes we'll say, I've got this done, I've done this correctly, but then we see when we go into the traits and the treatment of sailors and Marines, there can be a breakdown of those purported positive character traits. The Naval Academy is a stakeholder in this case, as well as other officer accession sources, as they're the ones who are going to be implementing the changes that we have in our presentation to sort of stop dark triad traits before they get the power and responsibility of leadership. The midshipmen and the cadets themselves, as they're going to be going through this process and be held accountable by some of the programs that we're suggesting. And then most importantly, the sailors, Marines, and other service members who will feel the effects of the changes made at Naval Academy and other officer accessions. We would also like to put forward that there's another stakeholder who doesn't necessarily want to see a positive change, but perhaps our enemies abroad and our peer adversaries. If we have a breakdown in leadership, a breakdown in command, if our sailors have a high rate of attrition because they feel mentally abused and physically abused, then we are going to be less ready and prepared when we are called to the fight, which is our duty and purpose in the Department of Defense.
So here we lay before you the questions posed by the case. We won't specifically read off each one, but the case at its core asks about how we, as an officer accession program, are going to screen for these dark triad toxic leadership traits in order to best assure that someone who exhibits these traits does not reach the high levels of command that Holly Graf reached while having these traits.
So the questions specifically that we're going to answer through the rest of our case, we wanted to acknowledge them now and say that we will come back at the end once we've fully expunged what we're going to do and gone over the details. So what program would we use? What assessments would we use? What actions would we take beyond those assessments? What would we recommend if these people do have traits? Should they continue or not continue? And then the education that we implement to prevent them. So our current system at the Naval Academy.
So our current system at the Naval Academy, we know that its purpose is to make sure that we're graduating qualified leaders who have the ability to be commissioned officers. And we do that based on these three criteria, so mental, physical, and moral. So mental, obviously based off of academics and specific classroom performance. And then physical, we have our PRT scores and athletic participation. But when you get down to moral, it becomes a little bit more blurred. How can you quantitatively measure somebody's moral character? And that's the problem we're facing now, and we're hoping to solve with our new system.
So again, the current problems with the Naval Academy systems that we see, the deficiencies are, it doesn't screen for these toxic leadership traits. The current standards aren't being upheld strictly across the board, and there are few formal and consequential methods for peer input to have a say in somebody's performance here. So in order to assure that these toxic leadership traits aren't formed in midshipmen, we want to change the institutional method of how we remediate midshipmen to change these toxic leadership traits within them. So our solution is to develop healthy leaders. Of course, the Naval Academy's goal is to develop midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically, and prepare them for the highest levels of leadership. In order to best do that with the systems that we have right now, we have to revise them. So with the current systems, we have to enforce standards strictly. We have to implement a system of midshipmen-based feedback for their peers who exhibit these toxic leadership traits. And then we have to screen and remediate people who have these toxic leadership traits with something that we have come up that we call the Officership Ethics Review System.
Our course corrections are based on the fact that some of these dark triad traits, such as narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, they're not going to be caught by the conduct and honor systems because those who exhibit, for example, psychopathy, are going to know how to work around the system to best serve their own success. So we're really focusing on that peer empowerment, where there's a reduced level of performance for people who exhibit things like psychopathy. And also understanding that being at the Naval Academy is a privilege. It's a privilege you earn every day, and it is not a right that you are entitled to. So operating in that different mindset as well.
So again, going into our solution, we have to revise the current standards. Moral, mental, physical. Physically, right now at the Naval Academy, in order to graduate as an officer, you have to pass at least one PRT while you're at the Naval Academy. We believe that this standard has to be revised and that true leaders have to be ready for whatever may come, whenever it may come. And so we would change the standard to separate upon a third PRT failure. That is, if someone has a consistent failure of the physical standard, they would be separated. After their first failure, they would begin counseling with a physical mission officer, a dedicated officer whose job is to prepare them for the future PRTs and make sure that they reach these physical standards. And then we would place them on the brigade training team, which is a program that makes midshipmen wake up early in the morning to have these physical workouts in order to prepare them for the PRT. And they would remain on this program until they pass 2 successive PRTs to show that they are reaching this physical standard. To remediate the deficiencies we see in the honor system, as of now, generally, separation only happens after a second or even a third offense through our honor system. Our honor remediation system that we have in place, we believe, does work. And so our revisions to our honor system, we would say that if you have a second honor offense, if you violate the honor concept 2 times, you would be mandatorily separated from the Naval Academy because you have shown this deficiency in your honor. And we would maintain the honor remediation system after the first offense to assure that we are trying to develop midshipmen and giving a second chance. The conduct system as it is in place right now, midshipmen may be retained for nearly all conduct violations. It's a very case-by-case basis for violations of the conduct system. We would like to revise that by saying that we would put more of an emphasis on the demerit system, and we would require a mandatory separation for over 500 demerits. Of course, this would require us to change how the demerit system works. And because of this, we would assign demerits based on the severity of the offense. So 6K offenses, violations of the conduct system, would be 100 demerits. A major offense, a major violation of the conduct system would be 50 demerits. And then a minor offense would be 20 demerits. The core of this is that currently as it stands, midshipmen are given too many second chances, even third or fourth chances, to remain at this institution if they show failures of leadership. We want to make sure that we are holding midshipmen accountable for their actions, and we want to give them a clearly defined system for which they will be held accountable under.
So now we're going to go into the peer feedback. So we want to put an emphasis on that peer ranking, because the peers are who you're going to see on a day-to-day level and who can tell your character versus a company officer or a senior enlisted leader who you're trying to have a positive relationship with because you know that's going to help you with commissioning or being able to get more leadership positions. So the ranking boards will only move a midshipman a certain amount of positions from what they have for their peer ranking. So you have the peer ranking and then you have your firsties who also rank you as well. So more of an emphasis on the peer ranking, which we currently do not have at the academy. So this class feedback, so we're going to do this once per semester. And so each midshipman will provide at least one paragraph for each of their peers. And so being able to then have 40 things of feedback for themselves to be able to say, what do I need to work on and what do my peers think of me? And so this feedback will then be given to the midshipmen anonymously in case we want to have still good relationships with each other. And so it will then, the names will be logged and recorded for future reference in case that they do need to be put up for a case against them. So this officership ethics review system is what would happen if you have this bigoted action or you have repeated profound character discrepancies. And they would have to have 6 midshipmen who know you quite well. And it's, again, an ethical backstop to prevent midshipmen who demonstrate these toxic leadership, these dark triad traits. And so they will be able to submit this investigation request, they have to have 6 people. And this is, again, lacking the ethical or professional fortitude to commission. And so they're necessarily not committing an honor or conduct offense. That might not result in their removal from the academy, but it's a profound character issue that should not go into the fleet to lead sailors or Marines. And so this investigation will be submitted at the beginning of 3rd class year and up to spring break of 1st class year. So we're giving that opportunity for plebes in order to develop their own character because we don't know them quite yet, and being able to facilitate and then have it at 3rd class year.
And we currently have a conduct system where if you break the rules, you will face adjudication and punishment. We currently have an honor system where if you lie, cheat, or steal, you will face punishment. But the dark triad traits, a lot of the time, allow for circumventing the system. So having the officership ethics review system, this is where we would fill in that gap or that flaw. We would say, we are truly serving the moral mission. We are empowering your peers. We are attempting and conveying to them throughout our 4-year curricula that this is an option, and it's your duty to utilize it if someone that you know well is truly and profoundly deficient when it comes to their character.
Having brought all of this up, we wanted to give a small reminder of the traits of the dark triad before we get into what we find are profound character deficiencies. Again, basing ourselves off these negative traits of psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellism, we find that the profound character deficiencies would be exhibitions of these traits, or of traits that are related to them, that happen as a pattern of misconduct over time. Obviously, midshipmen who are a little arrogant, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be bad officers. But if you see that a midshipman is arrogant to the point of fault over and over and over again, if you see that a midshipman is aggressive to a fault over and over and over again, we see that they likely will develop and focus on these traits when they commission. And because of this, we would say in order to submit a report under our Officer Ethics Review Board, we would have to see both a combination of these traits or just an excess of one to the point of fault.
So again, with the Officer Ethics Review System, the pre-remediation, so again, we have to say that a midshipman is deficient in a professional or ethical way. So again, the Machiavellian, the dark triad traits. And so we have to have 6 midshipmen with a meaningful relationship, so this just can't be anybody. Somebody that you do a sports team with, somebody that could be on the ethics debate team, and we'll submit a request and then bring them to the officership ethics investigation. Very similar to how we have the honor system. We're going to have an investigation occur, see where these deficiencies lie. And so we will also then have a trial by a jury of peers. So again, similar to how the Honor Congress works at the Naval Academy. And so then we will have the jury K come, and we will see if they need remediation or if it's not required. And so if remediation is not required, this case will be dismissed, and it will just return without any sanctions. If the remediation is required, they will then be forwarded to the officership remediation process. So this post-remediation is a 6-month program overseen by a senior officer at the academy. So this time period is where this mid can develop themselves ethically and being able to work on those deficiencies, work on those toxic leadership behaviors, and being able to meet with this officer every week and being able to have those conversations about how they can improve as an individual. And so at the conclusion of this remediation period, they will then be retried by a jury of their own peers in the company, and they will determine or not whether this worked, this was successful. And so this then has to be done by a 51% majority vote, and this will be done anonymously. So if the remediation is successful, the case will be closed.
And so you might ask, well, when they are first forwarded for this review board, why are we having just a jury of their peers and not necessarily a jury within their company mates? And then you might ask, afterwards, why are we giving them a jury of their company mates and not just a jury of their peers? We believe that in order to be separated to the Officership Review Board, you have to have an unbiased selection of fellows who will judge your case as fairly as possible and thus give you this due process that we're trying to maintain. However, at the conclusion of your remediation period, it takes people who know you, people who have a relationship with you, to see if you have actually truly been developed through the system. And that's why at the conclusion of the remediation period, the jury will be made up by their company mates, their cohort. And that's why if your cohort truly sees a change of character within you, then we believe you should stay. And if they don't, then we believe you should be forwarded for separation. Of course, this isn't the end-all, be-all. This jury does not decide whether the midshipman at the end of the day will be separated. They're forwarding this midshipman for separation to the commandant. And then the commandant and the superintendent will have the final say.
So moving to the legal dimensions of our case, we wanted to talk about entrance into the Naval Academy and understanding that it is a gift. You're getting a $400,000 education, you're getting room and board, all of these opportunities, and each day they need to be earned. So we want to, for our legal dimensions, say that when you enter into the Naval Academy, you'll sign a contract forfeiting your rights to take a civil suit if you are separated for one of these three reasons. So if you're separated via the conduct system, if you're separated via the honor system, or if you're separated via the officer ethics review system. One of the questions that was brought up when we were talking about the legal dimensions of this case were civil suits concerns. So we wanted to say that in cases where, let's say, someone believes that their rights have been violated, they may still file a SIMEO case or a SAPA restricted or unrestricted report, and that they may still take action if they feel that those reports are inadequate, but not the conduct separation process, honor separation process, or officership ethics review system process.
And in order to assure that midshipmen aren't trying to game the system through this officership review board in order to get out of service, we would say that when separating midshipmen through our officer ethics review board, we would give them a general discharge. In this way, they won't be able to bypass the Naval Academy service commitment, but they will also not be asked to repay their tuition, because it is the Naval Academy and this officership ethics review system that is saying, we find you at fault for your ethical character. This does not mean that we find you at fault for having to be at this academy, and thus we are not going to ask you to pay anything back.
So getting into our ethical framework, there's multiple concepts here that work into our system. Starting off with duty ethics, it is the purpose and the mission of the academy and other services alike to produce midshipmen and cadets that are going to be commissioned officers that are capable of leading other people in the fleet, in the Marine Corps, whatever service it may be. So while we focus primarily on violations of specific codes and regulations, we also have to acknowledge that there is also faults in leaders that are things that are not caught by these systems. So for instance, like we were saying before in these examples, telling small lies to your peers doesn't seem like a violation of a regulation, but it may lead to these types of toxic leadership that we see in Holly Graf. And then moving on, we have care ethics, and it ties into duty ethics. It is the mission of the academy and other programs to produce officers, but it is also the mission and the duty of officers to care for their people. And how can a toxic leader care for their people if they have these dark triad traits?
When we're getting into the question of ethicality versus legality, we again bring up the fact that, of course, someone who is arrogant, someone who is Machiavellian, they might not necessarily have any reason to be brought under a legal review, and there might not be a reason for legal action to be taken against them. However, there is a responsibility of character that a person has to have whenever they assume command in the Navy and Marine Corps and the military abroad. And because of this, we cannot allow failures of morality to grow within leaders, and so action must be taken, moral action must be taken against people who exemplify these traits in order so that they don't reach these levels of command.
Midshipmen are not civilians. They don't get to go about their lives without the responsibility of having care for other people, similar to officers. They must be held to a higher standard than their civilian peers. Going into virtue ethics, we admit that the military in the United States Navy is in itself a utilitarian force. We say we're going to send a few to protect a many, that we're going to make hard utilitarian calculus-based decisions on what we're going to sacrifice in order to move forward or move our operation forward. However, when we look at pedagogy, when we look at teaching, and creating officers who can then utilize utilitarian calculus, we must defer to virtue ethics. We must build a character that is beyond repute to set values that are critical for leading sailors and Marines, so that we set good people forward, who understand circumstances, who understand stakes, who understand kindness, care, empathy, accountability, so that they then can make those hard decisions.
Getting into some of the counter-arguments that we find within our case, you might ask, well, haven't some of the most successful leaders in the naval service demonstrated quote-unquote bad behavior as midshipmen? The case that everyone likes to bring up is John McCain. He graduated near the bottom of his class. Would this not be an example of a moral failure on his part? And we'd say that this does not necessarily show a moral failure. And because of the way that we have implemented the Officership Review Board, we would say it requires, again, this continued action of having these toxic leadership traits be exemplified in your treatment of others that would then allow others to forward you for the separation. And thus is kind of a fail stop for someone who might not be a great midshipman, quote unquote, in terms of academics or the physical mission, but would be a good officer because of the content of their character. Legally, again, we ask why should midshipmen be separated under the system, and why should they not have to pay back their tuition? Again, we say that they are being separated based on a failure of character, not based on a violation of any legal or other means. And because of this, we don't believe that they should have to be put into this debt. Finally, and I believe personally, most importantly, how can we assure that this system isn't used as a witch hunt, quote unquote, by fellow midshipmen against a midshipman they don't like? This is the reason that we say it takes 6 midshipmen that know a midshipman that would be forwarded to submit a report. Because if a person is truly not showing their moral character, if they're truly toxic, then it will be shown in the way they treat others, and multiple people will see it. And this would be a backstop against this.
And throughout the 4 years at the Naval Academy, using our comprehensive leadership education program, we would want to integrate the Officer Ethics Review program into that education to say that this is an option, you need to fully understand it, and to a greater extent, you need to fully understand the stakes. If you are putting someone forward and you feel that their character is profoundly flawed, it is a significant action that bears a duty and responsibility in itself. So to go back to answer some of the initial questions of the case, the first question we'd like to answer is, how would your program test for the risks of toxic or dark leadership? We avoided using personality tests or assessments because we felt that if you truly exhibited things like psychopathy or Machiavellianism, you would circumvent those tests. You're going to do what is necessary to stay ahead. And when you know what outcome you're looking for, and for example, a personality assessment, that changes how you take it. So we suggest the Officership Ethics Review System because we do believe that it tests for dark and toxic leadership, not through a sit-down assessment, but through constant review and empowerment of your peers to say this is incorrect and to hold you accountable. And it allows for multiple levels of, hey, I need you to stop this, I need you to change, all the way up to, we've come together and we do not think that we can advocate for your commissioning.
So getting to the second question, it's plausible to also ask, what sort of assessments would we use, and how can you really assess somebody's moral behavior? Because it's not something that's as quantifiable as, say, the PRT or academics. And we say here that leadership and personality cannot be truly quantified, but instead we've created a system that has a foundation of peer feedback and peer review that will identify these dark triad behaviors and traits in people and identify them, and also work towards creating a system that will either filter these people out or develop them into better people.
Getting to what actions we would take into regards individuals whose assessment says that they have these dark triad traits. Again, as per the proposed Officership Ethics Review Board, midshipmen who exhibit these dark triad traits would be given the chance to grow through our 6-month remediation process. And then if they do not grow, they would be forwarded for separation, whereas if they do grow, then we would allow them to be retained within the system that we've created.
So, again, would you recommend having these people with risky traits not continue as members of going into the U.S. Army or the Marine Corps? And so again, if they can be remediated, so if they're a potential toxic leader, and we see this, and we're able to say, okay, we're going to go up for remediation, and if they're able to remediate their behavior, we see no issue with why they cannot join the armed services. If they are not able to remediate their behavior, that is then just going to harm the subordinates and those that they lead with, and will lead to potentially more adverse actions in situations occurring.
And we think this empowerment of peer feedback can be something that we can push to the fleet as well, and say that if they're not caught at service academies, we care about that constant reflection. We care about acknowledging and pointing out that these dark triad traits and empowering singular group voices to say this person does not deserve the responsibility and duty of leading sailors and Marines.
Finally, with the question, what sort of educational measures would we take? We believe that at the Naval Academy, there's already a good, comprehensive system for leadership education that includes 11 class hours and mandatory leadership development traits. Of course, this doesn't encompass everything, and because of this officership ethics review system that we have implemented would be filling in those gaps to further educate and develop midshipmen morally, mentally, but specifically morally. And with that, we thank you for your time. We look forward for your questions, and we cede the rest of our time.
Thank you. Judges, you will now have a couple minutes to tabulate your scores, and then we will proceed to the Q&A. Judges, if you could give me a thumbs up when you're ready. Thank you very much.
Good, go ahead.
All right, we'll now proceed to the 20-minute Q&A portion. I will give warnings. This time I'll give verbal warnings, just so everyone can hear, when there are 3 minutes and 1 minute remaining in the 20-minute Q&A. Once again, each judge will have the opportunity to ask one question, and then time permitting, we will allow follow-ups. And without further ado, 20 minutes starts now.
Go ahead. You guys got the experience. All right, I'll go ahead. One of the things that wasn't talked about, and I'd just like your thoughts on it, is how do you use the chain of command? You know, when you're shipboard and you're out beyond the Naval Academy, and whether it's on a ship or a division or whatever, you know, you've got a chain of command that starts with the commanding officer and on down through department heads and division officers and chief petty officers and squad leaders and that sort of thing. Where does their responsibility fit into your program?
Well, we'd say directly into the officer ethics program. At the end of the trial of your company mates, you are forwarded to the commandant. And the commandant does have the last say. So at the Naval Academy, that is within the officer ethics review program. That's how we sought to utilize the chain of command. But overall, we felt that at the academy, it's the only time you're going to have this many peers available. When you go to your ship, you may have 5 other JOs. You may have 3 other LTs or captains, but you won't be surrounded by 1,000 of your peers again. We think that the Officer Ethics Review Board, it focuses on that peer accountability rather than utilizing the chain of command. But utilizing the chain of command should come far before the Officer Ethics Review Board program is used. If a midshipman is showing these deficient character traits, their peers who should care for them, even if they are slightly dislikable, for example, should say, you know, sir, I've had a real struggle talking. I'll use Midshipman Knight. Midshipman Knight has exhibited profound arrogance. I've seen her be duplicitous to other people. I think she's untrustworthy, and I fear for her ability to commission. That use of chain of command would start with, sir, I need your advice. could we have a meeting together? And we'd go to our company officer and we'd have a meeting together. And then if it continued to escalate, say, let's go to the BADO, let's get an 06's perspective who's had a long time in the fleet. Let's continue to escalate this and get advice until we have to use the final option, which is that officer ethics review board, where I would say, we have tried everything. It's time for your peers to hold you accountable before you hit the fleet and impact the lives of sailors and Marines. Yes?
This might be a little bit of a convoluted question. I'll try to talk through it as best I can. You come at this from a local command approach versus a big Navy problem, right?
Yes, sir.
And so what you want to do is change behavior of midshipmen that may exhibit toxic qualities. One of the problems I have with that in general is that, at least according to psychologists, the human brain is not even fully formed until you're at least 25 years old. So what you do at 18, 19, 20, 21, it may be effective, it may push the person in the right direction, maybe it won't. I don't know. But there's a possibility that, okay, this midshipman that exhibits toxic qualities and gets peer reviewed and might or might not have a problem with the commandant if it got to that level. Later, if they get commissioned and they're out there, there's nothing that says that those qualities still don't lie within them. Okay? And I realize you're not psychologists and that, you can't, I don't know that you can really change basic, deep-seated human nature. I'm not saying your program won't work. I don't know that it will or won't. But I kind of have some doubts about it. And one of the things I wanted to question was your peer reviews. I think you said you would have 40 peer reviews, right? Mm-hmm. So who gets that information? Does it go to the company officer? Who gets that information? And then how is that information used? And what does that evaluator or group of evaluators do with it? And I know you addressed partially the possibility that, well, hey, I don't like this guy. I'm going to write this guy up bad, even, just because I don't like him. So you've got that issue within the peer review. So the question is, how valid are the peer reviews? And then lastly, you have the review panel, the six people. And then let's assume that they say, okay, we're going to write this person up. I'm going to send it to the commandant and say that let's get rid of him. What is the likelihood that the commandant is even going to go along with that simply because of the investment, the financial investment, among other things, that the Navy and the Naval Academy has in that individual? So, once again, I'm not being critical of your approach or anything, but those are things that are just kind of running around in my head as to how effective would this really be. So, I welcome your comments.
I'll take the first question. I'll take the first two questions. First about investment, and then the second question about the peer review system. So for the peer review system, we suggested it at the Naval Academy within a company. We usually have between 40 and 32 individuals. So we would want to do a complete 360 peer review system. So if I'm in a company of 36 people, I will write 35 3-sentence paragraphs about my classmates, and they will each write one about me. So you would get every one of those paragraphs anonymously. And now there is a choice if you type into the 3 paragraphs your own name. That would be a choice that you would make. But the idea would be to have a more consistent flow of peer feedback. so that you can address issues that your classmates see quickly and efficiently.
And further with that peer review system, you wouldn't be the only one getting those reviews. It would go to your company officer, and they would be able to take into account the comments that all of your peers would make about you in terms of your aptitude for commissioning the grade that you're assigned. We did give some redundancy with this to say, of course, this isn't the only thing that should be taken into account, and so that's why we, and forgive me that we didn't make this clear, but it would only be able to affect your aptitude for commissioning grade plus or minus 3 points, this peer review system. But it does give more of that redundancy, and it does allow your company officer and other senior raters who are rating you to get more of an idea of your moral character based on your interactions with your peers.
And we're hoping that with 36 people, that even if there is 1 or 2 bad ones, for example, I mean, everyone's made a bit of a not of a friend. So if you have one person who says, I really hate this man or woman, I don't like them, I'm going to write them a bad review, that you would still have 34 of your company mates, the people you went through plebe summer with, the people that you've bonded with and you have a true love for, would say, you know what, maybe Midshipman Knight has a couple flaws, but overall she's a good person, and that would be able to provide a greater perspective than what the company officer would see when they go into reviews.
So each midshipman would receive 35 peer reviews
Yes, sir.
to see what his classmates or peers said about it,
Yes,
right? Okay. Well, I'll leave you with just one thing from my own personal experience. When I was midshipman, there was a guy in the class ahead of me. I won't mention any names. It's class of '63, and he didn't like, for some reason, like the top performers in our company. And so when it came time to, I don't know if you still do it or not, whether you fill out a grease sheet on performance, and you rank the people in the class below you. Okay. Well, this guy decided he didn't like him, so he inverted the whole thing, and he put the really, let's say, I won't use the word crappy, I would say poor performers all the way at the top, and put the top guys at the bottom, just for spite. I don't think it affected anything, but he did it.
Yes.
So you're always going to have situations like that.
And I agree, and I believe we agree. You always are going to have situations like that. And because of this, currently there has been a revision to the aptitude system to where those sorts of the people in the class ahead of you rank you, that sort of system, it isn't implemented. Now, only your company officer and your SEL assign you an aptitude for commissioning grade. And that is what we're trying to get at here, I believe, because it is our experience, that if the company officer and the SEL have these reviews from your peers, they do get a better sense of who you are as a person. And
we would honestly say perhaps that midshipman would have benefited from the Officer Ethics Review Program, and I'm sure some sort of counseling as well. It doesn't all, we think that it wouldn't, even though it seems as though our program would exist in a bubble, there would be a lot of opportunity for implementation. And for example, the chain of command, say, midshipman who inverted the ranking, why did you feel the need to do this? Can we counsel you? Can we talk to you? To answer your question on investment, and there is a profound financial investment into individuals who come to the Naval Academy, we often thought about this issue when we were creating our solution, and we asked ourselves, what is the cost of graduating a leader to the fleet who exhibits these dark triad traits and will act on them? How much attrition will we get in the fleet of highly trained individuals, of career naval servicemen or naval servicewomen who leave because this individual has ruined their quality of life and pushed them out?
You're right about that.
Yeah, so we had thought that it is worth a greater investment at the Academy if we can reduce the cost once they hit the fleet.
Yeah, good point. Okay, I'll shut up, guys.
First, thank you. It's a good presentation, gave me a lot to think about, and I'm going to be a little direct.
Yes, sir.
What is your assumption on the basis of each of those dark traits? Is it psychological? Is it social? Is it intellectual? Is it sociological? Is it moral? What's the basis for each of those traits? Because it appears you believe it to be learned and correctable. Depending on what your basis for the trait is, it is not correctable by any system that we can discern. So you have to tell, okay, just take each of the traits and tell me what your assumption for that attribute is.
Well, sir, I think when we looked at the dark triad, there's psychological assumptions under the 3 of those traits. But I think looking at the application, we can go through and say that this one is based on moral, this one is social, just like you're saying. But we think that the officer ethics review program, it allows for the possibility that it's both nature and nurture. If it's nurture, then we give them the second chance, not a third or fourth or fifth or sixth. We give them the second chance through the honor or the officer ethics remediation process to say, all right, here are ethics. Here's how your actions impact other people. Here is your duty, and something you need to understand if you're going to continue at an institution like this. And we give them a chance to change and grow. If it is that nature, for example, with psychopathy, if you are born a psychopath, and you can try to manipulate people, you can try to get around it. If that is truly nature, then we think that the second vote of your company mates will make that clear and will oust you from the Naval Academy. So we think that our program allows for the possibility of nature and nurture, for psychological and social, for learned and unlearned.
Furthermore, a point that I wanted to get at with Mr. Klau's question is that moral habits are built through moral actions through time. And so even when someone, perhaps at their core, is a little narcissistic, if they believe themselves to be above others, if their actions are moral, consistently, then I believe the end is that they are a moral person, even if they do exhibit this sort of character flaw of narcissism. And because of our officership review system, it gets to this, to where if the person's character in terms of their personality does exhibit these dark triad traits to the point to where they should not commission for fear that they will not be a moral leader, then they should be separated. However, if their mere possession of these traits is not enough to say that their actions are immoral consistently, and that you believe they can still grow into good officers despite having some of these character flaws, because we are human beings and we're all flawed, then we should allow them the chance to, and then continue to give them the opportunity to act in this moral way, despite perhaps at their core being a little narcissistic, a little arrogant, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. My second question then is missing from your program is extensive investment in front-end psychological profiling and metering before you even come through the door, because you're kind of trying to close the door after the hen house has been open and making a correction. Is if I'm understanding your approach, is that a fair assessment?
I would say it is, and I believe the reason that we stray from investment in psychological profiling, preventative psychological profiling, is that, as I believe Chairman Hunt said in our presentation, if somebody truly exhibits these traits of psychopathy, of narcissism, of Machiavellism, they would be intelligent enough to, on a personality test, in the way that they are currently being implemented, answer in such a way as to make others believe that they would be quote-unquote normal. They wouldn't exhibit these traits. And we do see that currently with psychopaths and with people who exhibit these traits. I would even say we see it with normal people who are trying to get to the academy. We all go up for interviews to get our congressional nominations, and everyone has a pretty good sense of what the people they are interviewing with want to hear. And so I believe that perhaps people tailor their response to make themselves seem a better candidate. And we believe that people who exhibit these traits would do that same thing, but to a greater extent. And for that reason, we stray from preventative psychological profiling, because we believe that the best way to really get to know a person's character is to get to know a person, and the people who best do this are their fellow midshipmen.
Okay. One follow-up to that then is how do you expect, in your vast amount of leadership experience as midshipmen, to be able to carry forward an evaluation of the officership potential of your peers? Because one person's narcissist who believes that they can lead a unit successfully into and out of combat may be simply another person's aggressive commander, and you need that kind of diversity. Otherwise, you're potentially taking the population to a paplum level. So how do you respond to something like that?
Well, we'd say
3 minutes.
I will try to keep it really, really quick. So we understand that midshipmen may not be able to assess someone's ability to be an officer, given that we haven't been in the fleet, we haven't been officers ourselves. But midshipmen are able to assess whether another individual is a good midshipman. And we've been told throughout our entire time at the Naval Academy that it is the traits of a good midshipman that will thrive under the pressure of officership. So we're just simply asking, would you trust this person? Would you trust this person with responsibility after all you've seen them in their darkest times when they were getting beat down during plebe summer? Were they true? Were they honest? Were they kind? Do they care? Do they improve? And we would want to convey the importance of the Officer Ethics Review Program, that it's not something to be wielded around as a social tool, that if you're doing it, you're taking on the responsibility of accusing this person. And with that may come consequences if you did it for some sort of social means.
One point, I realize you're in the cocoon, first off, well done. But the one point I'd offer is you have TAC NCOs, right? Bring them into the system. So when the Naval Academy reaches out, and these guys are going to be important to get into this leadership, to start this effort that you've created, I'll be there to support you. But we need to bring in those petty officers, NCOs. All right, one quick question. The 3 values, honor, courage, commitment. What elements, what attributes of those 3, just pick a couple, do you want to absorb and discipline yourself to practice or use so that you are seen as a positive leader as opposed to a toxic leader?
1 minute.
Commitment, most definitely. Commitment to your people. Commitment to self-accountability. Commitment to, even when the going is tough, when I'm faced with challenges that I don't think I can overcome, or let's say the Naval Academy, for example, puts me through trials, I have a commitment to that final mission to the sailors that I lead.
And having the courage to do what is right, having the commitment to the mission to do what is right. And then this courage would exhibit itself with that honor piece, having the courage to be honorable in all of your actions, having the good moral character to be honorable in all of your actions and all of your interactions, as we were trying to bring up in the case with your fellow midshipmen.
I also think for honor, having intention and true intention with what you want to do. You're not hiding the realities of what you're asking others to do and what you are telling them that you are doing for them. I am going to be clear in my exchange of, I will give you intention, I will give you accountability, I will give you effort, and I expect that back. So having honor and clarity between what is promised and what is given.
That's time.
Sorry, sir, we were rushing right at the end. Picked up the speed of the words per minute,
Got it.
definitely by the
Thank
end
you.
there.